Good morning, everybody. When Felicia Sandler contacted me about this project that you're going to be part of this morning, I was thrilled. And she's going to tell you a little bit more about some of the other events which are happening. Felicia Sandler is a composer and an esteemed member of our faculty. And I'm going to let you talk about all the rest.
Okay, good.
Thank you guys all for being here.
Welcome, everybody. Yes, as Bruce is saying, we're in the middle of a West African Art Music Festival here at NEC. We had a concert Wednesday night with the chamber orchestras performing the work by Felicia Sandler, and then last night had a choral and song program that was fantastic. And so today we're inviting Echezonachukwu Nduka, Attah Poku, Emmanuel Attah Poku, and Bode Omojola here to NEC to present to us on the topic of African Pianism. I'm hoping you got a program when you came in, but there's biographical information about our artists on the back of this program. I think I would just say briefly that Echezonachukwu focus, he's a phenomenal piano player, which you will hear shortly, but his focus is on this topic of African pianism. And this is the center of his research, and so it's a real treat for us to have him here in particular. Attah Poku is a royal drummer from the Ashanti Palace in Kumasi, but he's also in residence here. So in the theory program, I teach a course with him, an integrated course on music in Ghana, and our students drum every week with him and learn these rhythms from traditional music in Ghana. So you'll be able to hear how powerful of an artist he is. David Locke at Tufts University tells this story because Prof teaches there too, of when he wanted to invite Attah Poku to come and teach here in the United States, and he had to fly over and ask the Queen Mother for permission. And she cried, but said okay. So this is the first time that these two gentlemen are meeting one another and working together, and it's going to be fire. And then Bode Omojola is an ethnomusicologist teaching locally as well. He's from Nigeria originally, and his research areas are vast, but the particular relevance for us today and this week is his focus on African art music. And so he'll be able to give us some really phenomenal context for what's happening. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And if anyone needs a program, please, actually, can I have one first?
Hello everyone, good morning. Thank you, Felicia Sandler, for the introduction and for inviting us to celebrate West African art music. The festival has been exciting. We were here last night and we heard all the wonderful choral music and everything. So it's such a pleasure and an honor. I want to thank all of you for being here for this session. I'm hoping that it will be impactful, that we'll have so much to learn, and as we celebrate African pianism, it's also such an honor to be working with Prof. Attah and Professor Omojola. So this morning our session, what I'd like to do, we have already on the program a repertoire that will be drawing from different areas. So this morning we're going to have in 3 parts because it's a seminar. It's not a recital. So I'm not trying to play a recital. It's a seminar. But I'm going to start with a very brief demonstration. So it will be in 3 parts. What I'm going to do. The first part will be sort of looking at the rhythms, the rhythmic possibilities and what you have going on in African pianism, the vast sort of rhythmic patterns and structures and resources that African composers, are looking at and using in composition. So I'm going to start. I'll play a couple of pieces from here. Anyone I'll play, I'll let you know. But all of these pieces, if most of them, if not all, when we start discussing in detail, we're going to look at them. But for now, I'll open with maybe 2, 3, 4 pieces, I'll tell you. And then we'll look at, we'll now work with the drummer. The drummer is going to come in and we'll break it into sessions, into parts, to look at the different sessions, what's happening on the piano and how the drum interprets it. And then the second part will be the melody, melodic considerations. Because sometimes, when we talk about African pianism or African art music, in this instance, there's a lot of stress on the rhythm, which is very important and very central. But there's also this sort of melodic writing, some sort of melody going on in the music, and what are the considerations and what's going on in the music to help us appreciate and understand how we listen to the music or approach it or play it as pianists. Because we approach the page and look at the score and we want to understand what's going on in the score at that level before we begin to play the music. So we'll look at that, rhythm, melody, and the last part will be to talk about the performance techniques and considerations. What are the questions that pianists will ask when we approach African pianism score? We'll get the score and look at it. How do we go about interpreting it? What are the things that we can consider, both what's on the score and beyond the score? Some of the questions that we might have. How do we draw a sort of relation between what's on the score and the sort of the traditional or popular sources where the composers are drawing from? In other words, to listen or to engage the music beyond what's on the page in order to influence our interpretation of the music. So I'm going to play, if you were here earlier, we were trying to work out something. So we'll hear some examples of what's going on and rhythmically and all of that and how that comes in. And it's a privilege that we have because Professor Omojola, in addition to being a scholar, he's also a composer of this music. He's published studies in African pianism, published in Bayreuth years ago, and the work is a very important work in African. So and this studies work on readings and all the possibilities. He's going to talk about that. So afterwards, we're going to have Prof give more theoretical context as a scholar and also a composer of the music, and then we can open up the floor for questions and get your reactions and comments. So that's what I'm looking at. Just like an overview of what to expect, what's going to happen. Are we happy with that? Yeah. So that's what I'd like to do. Before we start, the idea of African pianism is African pianism generally is a branch or a part of African art music, because what we're celebrating is African art music. So African pianism is a part of it, right? So it is not outside of African art music. It is a part of African art music. And of course, Prof is going to talk about sort of giving a historical perspective of why this music sounds the way it sounds and what is going on actually on the piano. So it has a sort of colonial history. The piano is not an indigenous African instrument, but the idea is to make it one while we play the piano. We'll get to that point. So when pre-colonial times we weren't playing piano and all of that until the coming of the colonizers, the colonialism with missionization, early Christian missionaries who have come, set up churches and schools and brought in the instruments and started teaching. So you would find that at some point, some of the people, earlier composers who trained in that tradition began to compose music, Western art music, and bringing in the traditional and popular aspects of African music into it. In other words, trying to get the piano to speak an African musical language. All of these African instruments, we're going to hear the drums and everything we're going to do, the gongs and all of that, the music will play. How can we make it come? How can we transfer that to the piano, to let the piano do that? And what Professor Akinyuba did, coining this and providing a very solid theoretical framework for African pianism, is to talk about how the piano, being as a string instrument, being very percussive, also a percussion instrument, can also play the role of what some of these instruments. In other words, we have instruments like the xylophone, which is melorhythmic. You have some drums with tones and all of that, and then he drew a sort of comparison that if these drums can do this, and there's some sort of correlation with the piano, we can make the piano to play that role. In other words, for the piano to take on the role of this instrument, to become a surrogate. So when we play the piano in that sense, we're not just playing the piano. We are playing an African instrument or drumming the piano. We'll get to that point. What we'll talk about the performance techniques and all of that. So it's as we have African art music, the choral music, you have the opera, you have our own art songs and folk songs and all of that. The piano is also part of African art music, the African Pianism. So it's all part of. And in talking about West African art music, which has been our focus. We've been looking at Nigeria and Kenya a lot. Outside of that, we have a whole lot going on, both Southern Africa, North America, and all that. But our focus for now is West African art music, because that's what the festival is about. So you will see that some of the examples we have here are mainly from composers from Nigeria, Ghana. So that's why it's that way. So without further ado, this is not. I'm not here to lecture. Just to give a background, we'll get to the piano, and we'll start with Christian Onyeji's Oga. Christian Onyeji was my professor at the University of Nigeria. So Oga, in bracket, is Maiden's Game. So what you're going to get when I play that, Oga is Maiden's Game, and you have young ladies who play games, and they clap to tap, to tap, 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 to tap, 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 tap. Like, so the games that they play, the composer listened to all of that, recorded, and used some part of the rhythm to compose the music that depicts that game. So Oga is actually a game that young people play. So we'll get to that. And some part of it is also very instrumental, the drums and all of that, and we're going to work that out. So please, this seminar, I'm hoping that it will be very participatory. We're going to get you involved at some point. Some of the readings we're going to work on, when I'll ask you to please, tap them or clap them, we'll start slowly so that you also actually get what's going on in the music. So I would like you to, tap the rhythm at some point so that we'll feel it and not just hear it on the piano. All right, so let's go to Onyeji's Oga. I'll play that and then we'll go to another one. Thank you. 3. So Ufie is a 3-movement piece. We'll have the first movement, we'll have the second and the third. The one here is like the third movement, and these were selected based on the sort of rhythmic, the sort of rhythmic diversity. They're doing different things rhythmically. So the idea is not just to maybe to play the pieces, but to hear different things happening, in terms of rhythm. So we'll hear from the composer, and we will go to another composer. All right? And of course, it's after a dance. There's a dance called Ufie. So the 3 movements depict what happens there. We'll look at another composer. Let's go to Ghana. Okay, let's hear one from Fredo. We have Fred Onwerasoke. Ayayomo dance is from the southern part of Nigeria. I think south parts of Nigeria. So what he did was to travel around the African continent, gathering and recording, getting involved in recording traditional dances and all of that, and composing with that. So this Ayoyomo dance, there are 3 dances, but there's also dance 1. So I think this is the first in that dance. We could hear what's going on. So that 24 studies in African rhythms, there are 2 volumes, volume 1 and volume 2. They are mostly short and repetitive. They are miniatures, mostly miniatures. So they focus on most of them is just the rhythm to show what's going on rhythmically. So you can hear the repetition and all of that. So let's hear that. written out the readings for each of the pieces on the program. So this was after a dance called Otelogo. Otelogo is a sort of dance, it's a dance tradition in the southeastern part of Nigeria. The rhythms we have here, some of the rhythmic patterns we have on most, if not all, of the pieces. So the idea of this having Attah is to hear how it's how the drums play, and not that for the performance of African pianism you have the piano and drums performing, because the idea is for the piano to be the drums. So, to drum the piano. So, but for the sake of illustrations, we're going to have some of these rhythms illustrated here. So, we'll work together. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing?
Good.
You doing okay?
Yeah.
You feeling good? Okay, so first of all, I wanted to thank Professor Felicia to make this happen, which is great. I mean, I came to last night's concert. It was fantastic, and then I'm glad that I'm also part of this event. And then also, we're happy to have our brother here, and then also Prof as well. So thank you so much, guys, for coming. So, as our brother said, it wasn't a part of idea that we're doing this, but our brother just make it happen. So I'm here to supporting my brother. Yeah, so that's something that we need to let you know. And then also, as my brother said, African music is not that somebody will come and sit there and then do this the whole time. We always invite people to participate. So as my brother said, so get your shoes ready, your dancing shoe, your smile ready, get everything ready, because we're gonna bring you guys in. That sounds good to you guys? Sounds good?
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. So, yes, he's right. So, so we're going to mix it up a little bit. Number one, what we're going to look at is a rhythm called the standard pattern. And the standard pattern, some scholars have called it Kon-Kon-Kolo rhythm. And that Kon-Kon-Kolo is because of the way it sounds, sort of onomatopoeic, the way it sounds. Maybe you have the gongs or the drums. So it's like a timeline rhythm that guides the composition and also performance in many West African instrumental ensembles. And you have it going repeatedly like that. But in compositions that we have in African pianism, some things happen. You hear that on the piano, maybe on the right hand, and at some point he switches, the left hand plays that and the right hand has something else. But you hear that pulse, that very important standard rhythm. So the example we'll work with is Volta Fantasy. Volta Fantasy was composed by Professor J.H. Kwabena-Nketia, a very prominent scholar and composer himself. So we're going to look at Volta Fantasy. Some parts of it have that. So see how it goes. So that's the that's the rhythm. So it goes pam 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 pam. We are going to clap that. We'll illustrate first, and then I'll get everyone to try to do that. We are going to slow it down so that you can, clap.
You can do it.
Yeah, no, they can do it. Of course. These are amazing pianists and scholars, so they can do it. So, hear what's going on in the music. It starts with a sort of, maybe some sort of call and response. It's like a conversation, a question and answer, and then it goes on, and then we hear the rhythm going on. Then there's a response. It's like a question and answer. Then you come in. For that part. So, at some point in the music, then it switches again. You want to have thank you. So we can hear that pop, 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 pop. So let's try to get it slowly, right? Pop, 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 so that's okay, thank you. You're doing a great job. So this is the first one. The standard pattern is called the standard pattern, standard rhythm, or kolo rhythm, some other names. So we have all kinds of names for it, but it's very common. And you see that in many compositions. And it's also, it comes out in different, sometimes it's not like in maybe 12/80s, and sometimes you see it in different ways. So it's not just only, sometimes it is pam, 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 depending on, but it's a timeline rhythm that it's always there. You see that in a lot of compositions. So this is really important. It's in, like already demonstrated in Ikechia's music. So we'll go to the second one. The second one by Emmanuel Attah. The reading number 2. We have so the way he wrote it is actually fast, but we'll take it slow. So after the pop, you have that. don't want to do that. Are we ready? Are we ready for this one? We'll take this one. Bam, 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 we are going to take up the tempo. Because we're going to make it really fast. Bam, 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 bam. Faster. Bam, 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 bam. So let's hear that. Thank you. So we'll hear that with the piano and the drum one more time. 1, 2, 3, go. So that's one of the main rhythmic patterns in organ. We'll go to the next one, which goes. Towards the end of the piece, before the recapitulation. I'm sure most of what you heard the sort of that form, Western form of, having the main theme of the music open. You have a little bit of development, something going on, and then a recapitulation, the usual ternary, ABA. So it's part of the sort of Western art music influence in our composition that we'll hear and then hear something going on, and then it comes back again. So that part. Dance part that is like really fast. The way you have like a dance music routine, like maybe it starts out slow and then something happens. The dancers, the music goes on really fast and something happens and then they go back to their, to the former pattern. So that's the example. We'll go to another one, which is the last piece I played, Nigerian dance number 1. We'll have a sort of steady repeated rhythm. Maybe you call it a rhythmic ostinato or something like that. That keeps going, upon which the music is, built. So form. So have like diggy diggy tim diggy diggy tim diggy diggy tim diggy diggy and there are so many iterations of that. I'm going to play some video examples, and we'll hear, some things happening in traditional dance music, and see how that relates to what we're going to do now. So we have the rhythm back. So he starts by breaking it, and then putting it together. And then towards the end of the music, he breaks it again, like in small portions. So he starts, and then completes it. towards the end of the music, it comes back again. Pa 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 pa, cha ta 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 ta. These are some like common readings you hear in many compositions, but this is like very key. At this point, I'm going to play so we can hear some sort of traditional music, and see the dancers dancing and hear what the instrumentalists are playing. Sometimes it gets really more like complex with all the instruments going on, but you can hear that basic rhythm going on. So let's. Let's see.
Oh. Do we need to touch that?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I need to touch it. I'm not even plugged it in. Is it somewhere? Try to plug. Actually, this is a traditional dance, but it's like a church setting. You see a clergyman dancing with them. But let's also pay attention to what the instruments are doing. And then we hear like a faster version of that with other things going on. So, yeah. Let's hear something a bit faster. So, this is an example. You have the timer. It's steady, it has to be steady, you can't stop. The player can't change it. So you heard like other instruments coming in and going out, and some of the instruments they signal a change of step in dance. There are some instruments that will play something. The dancers know that instrument is calling for a change of step or dancer, but that's something different. But our interest is in the rhythms, what's going on with instrumental music. Even that tarap 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 tarap, you find that the first piece I played, that chord, that first it's that's that rhythm. Padam padam pam. So it's a very common rhythm. That's the point I'm trying to make. So tap 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 tap, and then that's only a knows when we hear and only this is tap tap tap. So that's that rhythm. So you keep hearing it in all kinds of compositions, used in many ways, and all that. So that's an example. There are other but let's go to maybe we'll play one more and then we'll continue with our rhythmic examples. So this one is a little bit different. This is from Urobo in southern Nigeria. A dance in southern for every dance, there is a timeline that keeps going. Other instruments can play, other things going on, but there's always So this is just to make us hear, although it's not, I have to say that it's not always only in traditional music, that composers get their materials from. There's also maybe the popular kinds of African music, like high life. It could be high life rhythms, what the guitar plays, this sort of thing. The composers can also use that. The traditional music, the popular music and all of that. Composers also draw from that. So we'll look at another one. Now, the scholar who coined the term African Pianism, he has, maybe Prof will help us with that. I'm not sure how to say, is it Keller Room? So this
it's back to the let me look at it again, sorry.
Yeah, so but that one, it's almost the main rhythm that forms this piece, a very short piece, is it's very repetitive. It's the same thing too. So like it sounds almost the same. So it's an atonal piece. There's no key. It's an atonal word. Can we try that? Right?
They can do it.
Yeah, we can do that, right? Let's try that. We'll take it slowly. That's the first one. Let's break it into two and then connect it. Right? The first one is Can we try that? That's one. Again. The other one is shorter. It's like a rest. Right? Again. So it goes this way. If we connect it, that's what happens in this. Now you have it like it keeps on pound, and that one is like very percussive. The idea of that particular composition is actually to drum, it paints a picture of some sort of supernatural beds and things going on, which is also another perspective in African pianism that I like to talk about, the impressionistic perspective. When we talk about impressionism, I might go to Europe, we always talk about Debussy, the Ravel, and all the people composing to paint pictures, and the African composers do that too. You even hear that in the titles of their pieces, echoes of traditional life, scenes of childhood, scenes of traditional life, things like that. They are very impressionistic. To be like this one is talking about 4 pictures from Oyo Calabashes, composing to paint a picture, to interpret an image or something like that. They're very impressionistic works. So that's also a perspective in African pianism, not just composing about dances, but to paint an impression or to create a picture. So there's that impressionistic perspective, which is also, we can connect that to European art music as part of that coming together. So composers also think of it traditional, like we'll get to the melodic part, and I'll play a short piece that Christian Onyeji composed that calls Echoes of Traditional Life, to paint an image of a normal traditional Igbo setting, even in a village and a traditional. So that's an impressionistic part of the composition. So there's impression in African pianism, but that's one part of it. So we're still talking about so this one is pa 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 ta ta ta. That's very important, and you also have that in other compositions as well. What we're looking at are very common rhythmic patterns that you hear in the music, and when you get the scores, you see all of that. And what happens is that when you see scores, because we don't have too many notes and there are a lot of things going on, not a lot of scales and the Abati bass and everything going on in the classical piece. So it looks, sometimes the scores may look a bit scanty, but it's very tricky because the actual work is in getting the rhythm, all the polyrhythms and everything going on in Hemiola. So it's to get it, and then before we start playing the notes is not the issue. You can always play the notes, but getting the rhythms, everything going on to work. So that's why we sometimes have to tap the rhythm. There's an approach to interpreting the piece. Get the rhythm, tap it, and get it ready, like to work it out, and then play the piece. So we'll look at maybe one more rhythm. I'll go to the melody part of it. Let's go to Fred Onorosoke and look at Okoye. Okoye was one of the pieces I played. So it's going tip, tip, tip. So the main rhythm there is so it's going what happens in that music, and it's also for drum and dancing, right? Let's go to melodies. What happens, what sort of melodies, what happens when composers decide to maybe have some sort of melodies going on in the music? Because it's not just about focusing on the rhythm, there's also the melodic part. We have like folk songs, folk tunes, there are chants in many African traditions, some of them very, esoteric chants. I remember talking to Fredo some years ago, and he said how he had to even join some sort of cultic masquerade, some sort of he had to be initiated into something for them so they can have access to the music, to hear the sort of chant, because it was not open to everybody. In order to use materials like that, of course with their permission, but you have some sort of melodies and chants going on. But beyond that, what is the structure of the melody? That is when we talk about maybe call and response. And one example for that, like a song is like a composer writing a song. We look at Nketiah's Playtime, for instance. It's like a song going on, but to have call and response somewhere in between, in the middle of the piece, in the melody. So you hear the music. to the main melody. And then on and on like that. So you still have that ABA going on. So in the middle, where you have that development, it's like where you have that conversation going on. But it's like a song, and it's just for play, you know. That's why I call it playtime. So you have that melody going on. Another example is Christian Onyeji's Echoes of Traditional Life, where he paints a picture of a traditional village setting that I spoke about. So it's like a folk song, right? So you have, even the melodic writing, some sort of conversation, question and answer, call and response going on in the music. Just like you have even in choral compositions in the choir, right? Different voices having some sort of conversation going on. You have that on the piano as well at some point, even melodic writing. This voice calls, you have that right hand, left hand, this right hand calls, the other one responds, and this calls, this one responds. You have this sort of conversation going on in the music at that level. So let me quickly summarize. The last part will be considerations for performance. How do we look at this piece? What are the things to think about? First of all, the idea of having the piano as a surrogate instrument is very important, depending mostly on the kind of music we're looking at. If it's very percussive music that takes after maybe drums and all of that, you want to look at accentuations where certain notes will have to be heavily accentuated to get that effect of drumming. I'll give an instance. The first, and a way to approach it, the first piece I played, Orga, right? There are two ways you could have played the part. I have that with one hand, like just playing with one hand. But there is another way, which is like to drum it. And that was what I did, like this. You understand the difference? So you could play one hand, but you can also drum it. Using both hands, like you are playing the piano as if you're playing drums. So have that balance and also place that accent on those notes. So instead of having one, just using one, you use like to play it like a drum. That's like a technique of drumming. The way Attah plays his own drum. So that's one way of looking at it, to actually drum the notes. But it also depends on the music. I know at some point you may have questions about that. But it also helps to understand what's going on in the music beyond what's on the page. And what suggests that sometimes, not all the time, is the title of the piece. that tries to maybe suggest the kind of music it tries to imitate. Maybe it's Uje or Ofie or some sort of dance, and you can hear the traditional dance, the music that influenced the composer, to hear how the drummers or the instrumentalists play that music, and see what you can draw from there in the performance, so that it will sound not like you're trying to recreate the same music, but to understand how the percussion works and see how you can interpret that in the notes in terms of accentuations, where to place accents, to get the percussive effect from the piano. That is the idea, to get the piano to sound like you're actually drumming in. So sometimes you have some words where the accents are placed, on the notes, but sometimes you may not be there. So what happens when maybe it's a score where it's not there and you actually want to get it happen? That is why it's important to also look beyond the score. In many cases, you might have the composers writing notes about performance notes, but you may not always have performance notes to guide your interpretation of the pieces. So that's why it is important. You may not always have the performance notes to guide, to show you the composer's intention. So it becomes very important to also try to look beyond what's on the page. This is it basically. But I would like to say that this practice or this art of composing or looking at dances, and using them, writing for piano in that tradition is not new. We have this hall full of very professional pianists. We play Chopin, waltz, mazurkas, polonaises. These are polished dances. Some of these are polished, based on polished dance traditions. So it's not new. That's the point I'm trying. It's not a new thing. It's a tradition in art music that the composers will write, polonaises or waltz or something. So the way you have that, and that's what African composers sometimes have tried to do. So the idea is not to play it so that people will dance to it, but to listen, in contemplation. The way we also sit down to listen to your waltzes and mazurkas and polonaises and all of that. So it's a continuous tradition, and we look forward to having many more pianists, interested in this genre and exploring it and looking for repertoires and works to also add to the standard canon that you're playing. And with that, I hope you have people who will get really more interested in hearing more about piano music from Africa. Thank you very much. We'll hear now from our resident scholar, the distinguished scholar, professor, and composer, whose music, in fact, I showed him his book yesterday. Actually, he's going to make some sort of, comments and contextualize as a scholar in this tradition, who has done enormous work. In fact, looking at even critical analysis and helping us understand the work that Akin Yuba have done so far in many publications. So he's going to talk about this work, and then after that, we'll open up, for questions and reactions and conversations. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I hope I'm not going to bore you after that wonderful performance. Why I'm really so proud of Professor, soon to be Professor Echezonachukwu Nduka is he is locally groomed. He was taught piano in Nigeria, and some of the things he's doing today came from his education in Nigeria. We have many people who are studying abroad, but he comes from Nsukka. That was also where I did my first degree. So I'm really, 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 really very proud of him. This another round of applause. So there was no African pianism before. That concept did not exist until 1970, when it was created by Professor Akin Yuba, EUBA. Now it has become almost a generic thing, but actually each time we use the word African pianism, we should put it in quote, because it was coined by Akin Yuba. Initially, he introduced the term, and then he began to theorize about it, to write more about it. Now, that was part of his own search for a voice as an African composer. Because modern African compositions, I have to be careful the way I use the word modern. Should I say European influenced composition started, as Nduka said, towards the end of the 19th century in many parts of Africa. And some of the earlier composers, what they did was what nationalist composers in Europe did, which would be to use a song, a melody in their piece, just to give a sense of identity. And Akimba felt that's a kind of a dormant thing, because the mere use of a national melody doesn't make your music authentic, nationally speaking, from wherever you come from, because it depends on how you treat the material within the piece. And indeed, some of the earlier examples of African pianism were modeled within the format of the sonata form. For example, the piano sonata number 2 by Ayo Bankole, which he wrote. Ayo Bankole is a Nigerian composer, or was a Nigerian composer, which he wrote in the late 1960s, I believe. He used a sonata form and then put in Nigerian melodies within that form. The same thing with Fela Sandler, also of Nigeria, who was writing in the mid 20th century. His folk symphony, for example, is a 4-movement work in which he used Nigerian melodies. So at times within the score, you are in Europe. At times you are in Nigeria. So the work is good in terms of what the composer was trying to achieve, and at that time in the history of art music. But by the 1970s, Akimba was also writing, compositions, but he felt that he wasn't really authentic to himself. He was imitating Western composers, and it tends to be more modernist, atonality. So by 1970, he came up with that concept. And what is ironic about that concept is that it's playing on rhythmicity, the very parameter that Western scholars used to stereotype Africa. Because those early scholars were looking for a way to differentiate Africa. They were not genuinely interested in the music, so they focused on rhythm. Somebody said if an African is falling from heaven, by the time he's landing on the floor, it's to the beat. That kind of essentialism, But what Akimba has done is to use that trope of essentialism in an empowering way. Yes, we're different, but it's not just that we're different. This is part of the things we do. So a trope of essentialism becoming a trope of empowerment. That's one way you could describe African pianism. Another point is that, what kind of pitch system do you want to use? So pitch system was also important. Is it tonality or atonality? And the pieces you had today, you can see, again, as I mentioned yesterday, kind of historical breadth. If you look at the piece by Nketia, the one, that very melodic, almost romantic kind of music, very, very tonal, nice, whereas if you remember the work by Uzoekwe, those ones tend to be modally oriented, the indigenous modal systems, which is very, very unique. If you look at the piece of Akinjuba, it tends to be atonal. So pitch system was also one of the things they did in their various pieces. Now, if we are talking about the possibility of an African art music canon, African pianism will be the bearer of such a language. The various composers that you heard were writing independently of one another, and you can hear the similarity in the rhythmic elements of their pieces. This kind of standard pattern, dun, 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 dun. The person writing in Ghana is doing that, the person writing in South Africa is doing that, the person writing in Nigeria is doing that. They were working independently, yet we can see that kind of interpenetration, cross-cultural interpenetration of the standard pattern in ways that gives that piece, those pieces, a sense of an African identity. One of the things that we also had in that presentation is how African composers are not just trying to simulate African instruments, but trying to simulate the contextuality of African music. Because in Africa, a typical performance will take place in a specific context, maybe it's wedding ceremony, funeral ceremony. Music is rarely engaged in a decontextualized way. So some of the things the composers are also doing is to see how they can simulate context in musical parameters. When I hear Uzoigwe's piece, For Nigerian Dance is number one. By the way, the publication, the published version doesn't have the entire music. I worked with Joshua in Nigeria many years ago. That piece, there are moments where the piece kind of slows down. You know, you remember when you play that? It's like he is also thinking about simulating the rituals within which Igbo music takes place. So it's not just the sound, but the atmosphere. And you made that point about this kind of impressionistic, resonances of the world. They are also simulating the context. How do you make music that you present in a concert context simulate the context of that music? And therefore make it possible to have a kind of a holistic experience of African music, even outside the specific context of the music. So that's also going on in the music. So just one or two more points, and then be time for questions. So, is there going to be, at some point, a body of work of African composers that is not an appendage of Western art music, in spite of drawing upon resources of Western art music? That's the question. And that was the question Akinyuba was trying to answer by coming up with this idea of African pianism, which has been encouraging scholars, composers, performers to think more deeply about creating an authentic African canon, an alternative art music, in spite of drawing on Western elements. So I'm going to stop at this point and ask questions. Thank you.
I can just help facilitate if people have questions or comments. Yes.
I was going to ask Mr. Nduka, excuse me for my mispronunciation, about negotiating the use of this pedal for sustaining.
Yes.
While you're doing the rhythms. It looks very challenging, and so how do you go about conceptualizing that even before you put your hands on the keyboard, and then once you put your hands on the keyboard?
First of all, I think about what's happening on the score, intention of the composer, because sometimes there are sections that are just quite rhythmic. You don't have this sort of maybe legato, song-like, lyrical passages that might require the sort of standard pedaling, the use of pedals, and to sometimes get that percussive effect, that effect of percussion. You may not have to use the pedal at some point. So it depends on the music, the particular composition. There is no single way of using the pedal across, like to say that African pianism, this is the only way you use the pedal. It depends on the piece, on the composer. Because there are works that are actually very song-like and lyrical. You see, there was one by Nketia that's Playtime. You need, you have that sort of pedal going on. Then at some point, so it depends on the sections of the pieces. Some will have will be really drum-like. So at some point, you might not have to use the pedal that much. So I think the way I look at it is it depends on the composition and what kind of. Sometimes even the work itself combines this sort of lyricism and the percussive effect. So to know when the pedal should be very actively used and when to let it go. So I think yes, that's one way to look at it. And other pianists may have like other views. For instance, I know that in this hall there are people who would argue, oh, you're playing some Bach on the piano. We shouldn't use some pedal at some point. And some say, oh no, let's use some pedal. You know, playing Bach because of course the music wasn't for piano, maybe for some harpsichord or something. But now we're all playing our Bach on the piano, and so there are schools of thought that would say, oh, this is a way to use a pedal. Some say no, don't use a pedal, just have it go like that. So it depends. But my idea, the African pianism, it depends on what's going on, what the composer wants, and what's going on in the music, and what is the music trying to say. That's the question. If it's very lyrical and song-like, we know when the pedal comes in to sustain and give that effect. But when we need to actually drum it, we need to hear that percussive effect. That might not be the best time to actually use the pedal in that way. So it's a sort of negotiation, and your question is very important. It's a very critical question, and we keep asking, even the pianist, the performer still today, what should we do about the pedal? It starting works. But it depends on individual pieces. That's just what I'll say.
Thank you.
I don't know if we're aware of this, but there is a multi-volume collection of works from Africa and the African diaspora that we have in the library. It's edited by William Chapman Young.
Now.
So
Yes.
some of these pieces are in there.
Yes,
Yeah.
some of the pieces are there. And the beautiful thing about that is that it's in like the volumes you have like the intermediate, like early, advanced, and that's like they are graded. Let me put it that way. They are like graded. This is for advanced, early, advanced, intermediate, and all that. That's a very important work. And there are 5 volumes of that. And it's also, yes, the diaspora. You have music from composers from Cuba, Jamaica, African diaspora, not just composers from the African continent. So it's a very beautiful work. So
He visited this seminar just about the time that all came out in 2007 or 8.
Yes, now, yes.
Yeah, and he played for us.
Oh, that's really beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. I want to ask you, Professor, or maybe everybody, is there some enduring conflict between pre-colonial pitch tuning systems in African music and the piano? And how do you see that playing out?
Yes, as most critically illustrated in Ugandan tonal system. Ugandans have an equidistant pentatonic scale, which is unrealizable on the piano. And yesterday I spoke about a piece that was written by a Ugandan composer, but technically is unperformable if you want to follow what's on the score. And at times they have to bring in Ugandan xylophone that is tuned that way to accompany the choir. It's for voices, not for the piano. Yes, that's the most graphic illustration of that. In other cases, not necessarily so, because we do have a variety of scales in Africa. Some heptatonic scales that you could almost approximate as found on the piano, and then you have kind of microtonal scales here and there going on. Apart from that, also the parameters of harmonic relationship. In many parts of Nigeria, for example, the interval of a major second is harmony, is sweet, is fantastic, is what people yearn for. I grew up in that. When I was growing up at home, my father was a polygamist, so my mom and her friend, the other wife, they will be singing and they will harmonize at the cadential point at the interval of a major second. It was beautiful. That was what I had at home. But when I go to church, it's triadic harmony. So so that kind of defines my musical experience right from the youth. How I had to cope with those 2 different kind of pitch systems. So
interesting. I wonder if there are composers who are working with other tunings. I know that in Indian music now we see some people adjusting the tuning of what we expect from a modern piano to be more suitable to certain kinds of Carnatic music or other things. But I mean, it seems like an area that could be explored.
yeah, I think at Justinian Tamusuza of Uganda is doing something like that, trying to kind of work on the tuning system. I'm not sure exactly. I have to read more about that. But he's one of the composers who is trying to see how the piano could be acoustically adapted to suit his own music. Yeah.
I don't know why I haven't thought of this before, but we have someone on the faculty named Emmanuel Attah, who has developed his own keyboard. He gave a presentation on that recently. Did you go to that? Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating.
I mean, I wonder if
And he's divided the octave into how many parts? So many more than 12.
yeah, and then you could just know what notes you need to play in order
Yeah.
to get this equidistant pentatonic.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
That would be interesting, especially for countries like Uganda. So many things to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been a period of experimentation, because every composer is asking the ironic question: how do I sound? Every African composer, or should I say most African composers, are asking the ironic question of how do I sound African?
Yeah.
Against the background of colonial rule.
Yeah.
So because when you go to school, Western type schools, we were all trained there. Many of these composers had to retrace their steps back
Yeah.
after acquiring Western techniques of composition,
Yeah.
in England, in the United States, and at some point, it's like, you know what, I don't want to sound Western, not because I don't like Western, but because I'm African. But now I have imbibed so much of Western technique and musicality. I don't know whether any of you will have read an article by Prof titled Tonality as a Colonizing Force. How do I decolonize myself? Is it even possible?
This is what you're describing in your experience of triads at church, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is that a utopian thing? Is it possible? Do we have to define the parameters of decoloniality in a way that accepts the reality of the situation?
Well, I think some of our students who come from China may have a similar question about how does Western classical music connect to some other musical practice.
Exactly.
And I think we see some of those same conflicts playing out in, among a new generation of Chinese composers. I think we see it in lots of places, actually. So, some of the issues are the same, not all, but it's an interesting.
And Akiuba also came up with what you called creative ethnomusicology. How you, as a way of dealing with this issue of identity. So going back to the village, to singers, speaking with them, understanding the music, recording their music, and then trying to use that as a basis of composition. Some Chinese composers I know are also doing that. All sorts of concepts that are interrelated as a way of dealing with the issue of identity, not in a crude binary way of abandoning Western music, but as a way of forging something that is reflective of the post-colonial experience, but is still uniquely African in its sound.
We should pick that up in the panel later.
Yeah, I'm taking notes.
More questions from anybody? I'm curious about how many people before this morning remember ever hearing a piece of African piano music. Hands? Yeah, very few, huh? So that's a very interesting comment. Yeah. So you did something really important this morning.
And you saw how the drummer was taking you heard that rhythm for the first time. If you didn't stop him, he will play for the next 30 minutes. Improvising on that thing. So that kind of interconnectivity, it's very inspiring. I really like that.
Say something more about the events that are still to come in the festival.
There's actually just one more event, And that's this afternoon at 3 o'clock. I'm hoping you can come. Bode Omojola will be part of a panel with a Ghanaian composer and choral director and ethnographer named John Donkwa, who was here our first day and last night. And then another professor named Kwasi Ampane, who is actually becoming much more prominent as a speaker in multiple arenas. He gave a very important lecture recently in Ghana and was part of a repatriation project to get some instruments that were in the US returned to Ghana. So he's just a very interesting thinker and musician who's actually studied a lot of popular music too. Yeah. High life music. So these three scholars will be part of a panel. Monique, did you want to say anything about that, or?
I'm going to say a few words. Professor Sandler and I looked at how to frame this panel, and so you could sort of see in two parts. The first part would be identity as Africans and how that, and also some of personal journeys. And I think that was trying to also be relevant to students on campus. If we are international, what does it really mean for us studying Western classical or music in a different country? And then the second part is about what is the role of African art music in curriculum, and what is the potential there, and what is synergistic in that realm.
Yeah. Which I'm so interested in, obviously, as a teacher. I'm just curious how we can expand curriculum to be really inclusive, and that's going to be in the library at 3 o'clock, 3 to 4:30, for same time kind of frame that we have on the second floor. You go in the library and just go up the stairs. It'll be right there. So even if you can't come for the whole thing, feel free to drop in. It should be really interesting. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much for a wonderful